The outpost on Varela 9 floated quietly above the soft blue glow of the planet below. It was small, made of metal and silence, orbiting a forgotten world far away from the main routes of the galaxy. Inside, the corridors smelled of disinfectant and recycled air. It was not a place of glory or beauty, but of healing. Wounded soldiers, refugees, and survivors of many species came here after the long and brutal Threx-human war. Sergeant Mason Hale was one of them. He had arrived 3 weeks earlier, carried in by a medship with half his armor melted and his skin burned from plasma fire. The medic said he was lucky to be alive. Mason did not feel lucky. He spent his days lying in the recovery ward, staring at the pale ceiling, wondering why he had survived when so many others had not. He was tired of the war, tired of blood, tired of the sound of screaming, human or otherwise. At night, when the lights dimmed, the station was quiet except for the soft hum of the life support systems. But one night that silence was broken. It began with a sound and high-pitched and trembling like a siren made of pain. Mason turned in his bed, frowning. The sound grew louder. It wasn't an alarm. It was crying. A child's crying. He sat up. It was strange. There were no children on Varela 9. It was a place for soldiers and broken people, not families. Yet the crying continued, echoing through the corridor outside his room. He heard the distant voices of medics, the sound of hurried footsteps, and then the crying again. Sharper, desperate, alive. He swung his legs over the side of the bed. His skin still ached from the burns, but curiosity was stronger. He grabbed the small medical exobrace and began to walk slowly down the corridor. When he reached the main ward, he saw the cause of the noise. On one of the med beds lay a woman with pale violet skin and silver hair that shimmered faintly in the dim light. Her breathing was weak, her chest rising and falling slowly. In her arms was a small child, no older than a few weeks, with the same silver tone to its skin and small lines of bioluminescent patterns glowing faintly along its cheeks. The baby was crying, and nothing the medics did could stop it. "She's Threxian," one of the human nurses whispered. "Her ship was attacked by pirates. She was the only survivor." "The baby's distress field won't stabilize," said another, adjusting a glowing instrument near the child. "We've tried everything. The neural lullabies, the field dampers, even the mother's scent sample. It's not responding." The alien mother stirred weakly and reached toward the baby, but her arm trembled and fell. Mason could see exhaustion in her face, the kind of exhaustion that no medicine could fix. He felt something tighten in his chest. He had seen many aliens in his life, some enemies, some allies, but this moment felt different. There was no politics here, no lines drawn in the sand, just a mother and her child, and a cry that sounded painfully familiar. He remembered another cry on a ruined human colony years ago. The sound of a baby under a collapsed shelter, crying as fire rained from the sky. He had dug through the rubble with bare hands until he found her, a small girl covered in ash but alive. He had carried her out and held her until she stopped crying. He never saw her again, but he never forgot that sound. Now, on this distant outpost, the same sound pulled at him again. Mason stepped forward slowly. The medics turned, surprised. "Sergeant, you shouldn't be up." "You're still under." "I can walk," he said quietly. "Let me try." The nurse hesitated. "You're not trained for—" But the Threxian baby turned its head toward Mason's voice. The crying stopped for half a second. Then it began again, softer now, almost uncertain. Mason took another step. "It's all right, kid," he said softly. "I'm not gonna hurt you." He reached the bed, looking down at the small alien infant. Its eyes were large and luminous, reflecting the faint glow of the med lights. It looked at him, confused, afraid, but then something changed. The baby's bioluminescent markings began to pulse slowly, matching the rhythm of Mason's heartbeat. The medics froze. "That shouldn't be possible," one whispered. Mason didn't care about the science. He just reached out slowly and the baby reached back. He lifted it gently, careful not to disturb the medical monitors, and held it close to his chest. The baby squirmed once, then went completely still. The crying stopped. For the first time since it arrived, the infant was silent. Everyone in the room stood motionless. The nurse stared at her readings. Heart rate stabilized. Stress levels dropping. Neural patterns aligning. The Threxian mother opened her eyes. She saw the human soldier holding her child, and for a moment her expression hardened. Confusion, then fear. But as she saw her baby calm in his arms, that fear melted into quiet disbelief. Mason looked down at her and nodded slightly. "She's okay," he said softly. "She's safe," the woman tried to speak. Her voice was weak and musical, words in her own language. Mason didn't understand, but he understood the look in her eyes. Gratitude. Relief. From that night, something changed in the outpost. Whenever Mason was nearby, the baby was calm. Whenever he left, the crying began again. It became a kind of rhythm for the station, the baby's cries echoing through the halls until someone would sigh and say, "Get Hale." Then Mason would come grumbling, pretending to be annoyed. But every time he held the child, the crying would stop. He began to visit often. The medics didn't stop him. In fact, they welcomed it. They even started collecting data, trying to understand why this human soldier could do what no machine could. They said his heartbeat frequency resonated with the Threxian infant's biofield. They said it was scientifically impossible, but Mason didn't think about that. He just did what felt right. The Threxian mother, Sarah Lynn, recovered slowly. She couldn't speak much common tongue, but she learned to say Mason's name. "My son," she would say softly, smiling faintly as he entered the room. Her eyes would follow him as he moved, not with fear anymore, but with curiosity and something else. Something like hope. One day, as Mason held the baby and hummed softly, an old earth lullaby his mother used to sing, Sarah Lynn spoke a few broken words. "Human song," she said, pointing to her chest, then to him. "Feel peace." He nodded. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It's a lullaby. Helps babies sleep." She watched the baby's glowing eyes slowly close. No cry. "Only with you." Mason shrugged. "Guess she likes me." Sarah Lynn smiled, a small, tired smile. "Human heart. Strong." He didn't answer, but her words stayed with him. Over the next few days, Mason learned to care for the baby as if it were his duty. He fed her the special nutrient formula the medics had prepared, changed the strange glowing cloths the Threxians used instead of diapers, and even learned to understand the small shifts in the baby's color. Soft blue meant calm, green meant hunger, and red meant distress. The other soldiers joked about it. "Look at Hale," one said with a grin. "The galaxy's toughest babysitter." Mason only rolled his eyes, but he couldn't hide the small smile that crept onto his face whenever the baby reached for his finger. One night, the station's power dimmed. A minor system failure, the medic said. Nothing serious. But when the lights flickered, the baby began to cry again, not out of fear, but as if she sensed something. Mason held her close, whispering softly, "It's all right, kid. Just the lights. Nothing's gonna hurt you." The power came back a few seconds later, and the baby's glow returned to a calm blue. But the moment left Mason uneasy. He had learned long ago to trust his instincts, and right now, they whispered that peace never lasted long. Later that week, he overheard two technicians talking near the comm station. Threxian pirate signals picked up. One said quietly, "Looks like they're searching this sector." "You think they're after the survivor?" the other asked. "The woman and her kid?" "Probably. Rumor says her mate was some kind of scientist. Maybe the kid's important." Mason's grip tightened on the small metal cup in his hand. He didn't like the sound of that. He went back to the ward that night. Sarah Lynn was asleep, but the baby was awake, staring up at the ceiling with wide, glowing eyes. Mason sat beside the bed, watching the soft rise and fall of the child's chest. He could hear the distant hum of the station and the faint whisper of his own breath. "You've had a rough start, haven't you?" he murmured. "Don't worry. You're safe here." The baby blinked as if she understood. For a long moment, Mason sat there in silence, feeling the small warmth of the child against his arm. In that quiet room, far from Earth, far from the noise of war, something in him began to heal too. He realized that for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about the battles or the pain. He was just there, present, human. The next morning, Sarah Lynn was stronger. She sat up, her eyes clearer now. When Mason entered, she smiled faintly and said, "You come." She wait. "Yeah," he said. "Guess I can't stay away." Sarah Lynn reached out and touched his hand, a gesture of her people's respect. Her skin was cool and soft. "Thank you," she said, her voice still halting but full of emotion. "Humankind." Mason looked at her and shook his head. Just doing what anyone would do. But deep down he knew that wasn't true. Not everyone would walk into an alien ward at night because they couldn't stand to hear a baby cry. Not everyone would hold a stranger's child like their own. He didn't know why he had done it. Maybe because after everything he'd seen, after all the destruction, he needed to believe there was still something worth saving. Something innocent. Something pure. The quiet of Varela 9 did not last long. A week had passed since Mason had calmed the baby for the first time, and life at the outpost had settled into a rhythm. Mason had become a constant presence in the ward, holding the child, keeping her calm, and somehow making the alien mother, Sarah Lynn, smile more often than anyone thought possible. But peace is always fragile, especially in a galaxy that never sleeps. One morning, the station's alarms rang sharply. Red lights flickered across the corridors, and the low hum of the life support system shifted into a tense rhythm. Mason was still in the ward when the first warning came through the comms. Pirate ships detected, the voice of the outpost communications officer said. Approaching fast. They are armed and aggressive. Estimated arrival 15 minutes. Mason's jaw tightened. He looked down at the baby who was cooing softly, unaware of the danger outside. Sarah Lynn stood slowly, holding herself upright, her violet skin pale with fear. Mason knelt beside the child and whispered, "Don't worry, I've got you." The station commander, a tall human woman named Lieutenant Kira Voss, ran into the ward. "Hale, get everyone out. We need to evacuate," she ordered. "The pirates aren't here for negotiations. They want the child." Mason's eyes narrowed. "I'm not leaving her. You don't have a choice." Voss snapped. "If you stay, you'll die." "We're not risking the baby either." Sarah Lynn stepped forward, her voice quiet but firm. "Human. He stay, protect, baby safe." Mason met her gaze and nodded. "Exactly," he said. "I'm not going anywhere. If they come for this child, they'll have to go through me." The medics and remaining personnel began to evacuate. Mason stayed behind, securing a small section of the ward. He loaded what equipment he could onto his exosuit, a plasma sidearm, a kinetic shield, and a few grenades. He strapped the baby into a secure carrier across his chest, checking the glowing patterns that indicated her comfort and distress. She was calm, her small body pulsing in gentle blues and greens. He took a deep breath, letting the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He had fought in countless battles, but this was different. He wasn't just protecting a human comrade or a strategic outpost. He was protecting innocence, a life that had nothing to do with war or politics. A life that depended entirely on him. The first wave of pirates arrived faster than anyone expected. Their ships tore through the thin atmosphere of the planet below, their weapons firing warning shots at the station's outer hull. Mason watched from the observation window as they prepared to land assault pods. He adjusted the carrier, holding the baby closer. When the first pod hit, alarms shrieked. Mason activated his kinetic shield and opened the ward doors. The pirates entered with weapons raised, expecting an empty station or frightened humans. They did not expect him. Mason moved with the precision of a soldier who had survived impossible odds. He fired his plasma sidearm, each shot calculated, taking down the first two attackers. The others faltered, uncertain of the human who stood his ground with no one else around. But he didn't attack recklessly. Every move he made was to protect the baby. The infant stirred slightly and Mason hummed softly. The sound was instinctive, an old earth lullaby he had used when he was a child, a song his mother had sung. The effect was immediate. The baby relaxed in the carrier, her glowing patterns pulsing in harmony with Mason's heartbeat. Something strange happened. The pirates paused. They hadn't expected the child's biofield to react to him in this way. The glowing patterns from the baby seemed to ripple outward, subtly affecting the attacker's neural systems. Mason didn't understand it, but he didn't need to. He simply moved, covering the exits, keeping the baby safe. The battle was intense. Mason ducked behind a console as a plasma shot whizzed past. He returned fire, taking down one of the pirates who had tried to flank him. The baby's glow shifted slightly, a sign of distress, and Mason hummed again. The attackers froze for a moment, confused by the strange light and sound emanating from the child. Sarah Lynn, recovering from her injuries, had hidden near the medbay entrance. She could only watch, wide-eyed, as the human soldier she had once feared now became a shield, a protector, and something more. She whispered softly to herself, "Human, strong, brave, protect all." Mason moved quickly, using the environment to his advantage. He activated a security turret, firing into the advancing group, and then dropped a small gravity grenade, sending two pirates tumbling into the wall. He adjusted the baby carrier again. "Almost done, kid," he murmured. The pirates regrouped, more aggressive now, but Mason had one advantage they did not expect. The baby, sensing his heartbeat and calm presence, emitted a soft pulse that disrupted their coordination. It wasn't intentional, but it worked. Mason used the moment to disable their weapon systems, shutting down their assault pods with precise shots and clever use of the station systems. One pirate broke through and ran toward the ward. Mason intercepted him, tackling him to the ground. The two struggled, but Mason's training and determination outweighed brute strength. With a swift movement, he disarmed the attacker and used the momentum to knock him unconscious. When the last pirate realized their assault was failing, they retreated, leaving the station battered but intact. Mason sank to the floor, exhaustion hitting him like a wave. The baby in his arms yawned and stretched, completely unaware of the danger they had just faced. Sarah Lynn approached slowly. Her steps were cautious, but her eyes shone with something Mason had never seen before: gratitude and trust. "You saved," she said simply. Mason shook his head. "No, we saved each other." The medics returned after the pirates retreated. They assessed the damage and treated Mason's minor wounds. He smiled wearily at the baby, who cooed softly. "See? Nothing to worry about," he said. In the days that followed, Mason, Sarah Lynn, and the baby formed a small but unbreakable bond. The baby grew more attached to Mason, and he found himself teaching her in simple gestures how to respond to the world. Sarah Lynn watched silently, learning the ways of human care, gentle touches, words of comfort, and the instinctive attention to a child's needs. One evening, as the blue glow of Varela 9 filled the ward, Mason held the baby in his arms and looked out at the stars. He realized that in protecting this small life, he had found a purpose that went beyond battlefields, beyond politics, beyond survival. He had discovered the reason why humanity endured, not through weapons or conquest, but through care, courage, and the willingness to protect the innocent. Sarah Lynn joined him, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. "Human, teach baby," she said softly. "Strong, brave, love." Mason looked down at the child, who now slept peacefully, her small chest rising and falling in perfect rhythm with his heartbeat. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I'll teach her everything. About surviving, about hope, about being human." Weeks passed. The outpost was repaired, and news came that the galaxy was slowly moving toward a fragile peace. Mason, Sarah Lynn, and the baby remained together, a small family in a vast and uncertain universe. The medics often marveled at the bond, unable to explain scientifically why the baby only calmed in Mason's presence. Mason didn't care. He only knew that the child was safe, and that was enough. Years later, the child would grow up to become a symbol of unity between humans and Threxians, a living reminder that compassion and courage could overcome fear and violence. But for now, she was just a baby, resting in the arms of the human soldier who had risked everything to protect her. Mason looked down at her sleeping face, and for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to hope. Hope for her, hope for Sarah Lynn, and hope for a galaxy that still had room for kindness. The stars outside the window shimmered, distant and indifferent, yet somehow welcoming. Mason whispered another lullaby softly, not for the baby alone, but for himself too. In that quiet ward on a small, forgotten world, humanity's true strength, courage, empathy, and love shone brighter than any weapon or warship, and the baby slept on, safe in the arms of the human who had changed her life, the alien mother watching silently, and the galaxy moving forward one heartbeat at a time.